These two particular cases in the plenary power doctrine have also led to the result that a person can be deported from the United States no matter how long he's lived in this country. A particularly harsh provision that involves, in most recent times, people who've come to the United States as refugees, many young people who've come from Southeast Asia, even as infants. And as they've grown up, they've got into some trouble, and as a result of crimes that they've committed, they may be subject to deportation back to countries that they've never known. They're just as American as anybody who was born here, but because of this plenary power doctrine and the proposition that Congress can determine who may remain in the United States and who cannot, people who've lived here all their lives basically can be subject to deportation. And it's also led to sort of retroactive deportation provisions. And that, what I mean by that is Congress can pass a law now making an act a deportable act, even though it was not a deportable offense at the time it was committed. We have cases now of people who've lived here a very long time, committed a crime at a time when they were not subject to deportation. As a result, Congress has come along now and said retroactively that becomes a ground of deportation. And finally, American citizens, the rights of American citizens to family, to be associated with family members, really takes a backseat to the power of Congress to determine who can stay and who can enter the United States. And the result is many, many cases of families split apart from their, particularly from their American relatives. There have been a lot of efforts over the years to do away with this plenary power doctrine, particularly in the 1950s, but for a certain reason the Supreme Court wouldn't look at that, and the result is what we have today. Out-and-out discrimination based on race, based on crimes that were not deportable offenses at one time, systems where families are split apart, all as a result of these two cases that came along in the 1880s, so-called Chinese exclusion cases.
Thank you, Don. So, Connie, with the Exclusion Act in place, with the Supreme Court refusing to overrule it, recognizing the plenary power of Congress to enact immigration laws, deportation and exclusion laws, the community was affected by the exclusion law. And give us some historical examples of the impact that the exclusion laws had on the community.
Well, it might be a little presumptuous for me, but I feel directly affected by the exclusion law. I mean, the earliest memory I have is sitting around the table. We live with my grandparents, but there are all these elderly single men having a bowl of rice with us. And my father told me repeatedly that you're so lucky. Your grandfather came to America as an 11-year-old laborer in 1881, before the exclusion law. And I was very aware that, you know, without his coming at that time, he would have been excluded because he was a laborer. And then there are these other laborers that were his friends who weren't as fortunate as my grandfather to establish himself as a merchant to send for his wife. And they were the stranded single bachelors in our society. So I was very aware of that. Oral history really brought to life for me my heritage. I mean, my grandfather described how the Chinatown in San Jose was burned when he was a teenager. He was 15. In 1887, it was burned to the ground by arson. And fortunately, he escaped to another Chinatown because a fearless German-American landowner leased land for a Chinatown to be built, and that was where my father was born.